Hey, it's Art from my new microphone. Let's discuss parallel compression, how to set it up, and why we should be using it in our mixes. So for starters, what is compression? Compression is a dynamics processor, meaning that it affects the dynamic range of a signal, and more specifically, it reduces or compresses the dynamic range of a signal. It does so by effectively attenuating the loudest parts of a signal while leaving the quieter parts alone. As the signal feeding a compressor surpasses a set threshold, that compressor will effectively attenuate the signal by a set ratio, and then as that signal drops back down below the threshold, the compressor will disengage. Now to quickly move on to the second half of the equation, we should discuss parallel processing. Parallel processing happens when we have two versions of a signal or a group of signals, and we go about affecting or processing, in this case with compression, one of those versions and then mixing the two together, ultimately at the mix bus. In some cases, we can utilize a wet-dry control on a compressor to achieve parallel compression. However, it's typically the case that we use an effect send and return system where we will send audio from a track or group of tracks to an independent auxiliary track that will act as our effects return, which we will compress heavily and then mix the two versions together. Parallel compression acts as a sort of upward compression in mixing, especially if we have the heavily compressed version of the track mixed underneath the original. If we have no compression on the dry channel, it means that we will not be reducing the dynamic range and the peaks and transient information will be at the set level. Then if we were to mix a heavily compressed version underneath on the parallel channel, we would be adding a signal with tamed peaks to that original signal. And as we add them together, the heavily squashed peaks and transients of the heavily processed parallel channel will not add as much to the peaks of the original as the lower level information. Therefore, by mixing the two together, we will effectively achieve upward compression, where we will actually be decreasing the dynamic range by bringing up the quietest parts of the signal rather than attenuating the loudest parts of the signal. I hope that all makes sense. The big benefit of utilizing parallel compression in a mix is that we get to maintain the clarity and transient information of the dry signal while also getting that grit and weight as we push up the heavily compressed parallel channel along with it. So with that, let's hop into Logic Pro and I will show you how to go about setting up parallel compression in your mixes. All right, here we are inside of Logic Pro where we will be discussing parallel compression. This session, we will be working on a song called W Starts With a D from one of my projects called Blunt Cousin. And what I want to show you in this session is parallel compression on a vocal, and then we will look at parallel compression on the drum bus afterward. So right here we have a second verse. I'll just play this back quickly for you so you can hear what we are working with.
Came up, it's gonna be less than frozen again. Got rolled up in it, right down the face it. Get Lucifer in his teeth, like he was counting his.
So we can see here that we have two main vocals right here, and these vocals are being sent to bus 14. If we scroll over here to bus 14, we have Lukey Vox right here. So if we were to solo this,
Devil came up, it's gonna be less than frozen again. Got rolled up in.
so we see that there's already a little bit of EQ, compression, and de-essing happening on this. We were also sending this to a few effects, so I'm actually going to mute these so that we are only working with the dry vocal.
Devil came up, it's gonna be less than frozen again.
And so we'll be dealing with this doubled vocal when it comes to parallel compression. So the first way to go about parallel compression is to actually insert a compressor. In this case, we will use Logic's stock compressor and go down here to the mix right here. So this mix is effectively the wet dry knob of this compressor. So right down here at 0%, we are only passing the dry signal through, and all the way up here at 100%, we are only passing the wet or fully processed compressed signal through this plugin. If we go to 50% right here, it means that we are sending equal parts of the dry unprocessed or uncompressed signal with equal parts fully compressed signal. And so if we were to do something very drastic on here, like bringing the threshold down, the ratio up, I'll turn off auto gain for now and really compress this bus. Let's listen to what that sounds like.
Devil came up. It's gonna be less than frozen again. Got rolled up in, right down to face it.
So that's really compressed. And now if we were to mess around with this dry wet control or mix control in this case, we can effectively turn the compression on and off and anywhere in between with parallel processing.
Came up. It's gonna be less
So that's
than
no compression.
frozen again.
This is full compression.
God rolled a beam of light down new faces.
And we can bring in parallel processing.
Kick Lucifer in his teeth like he was Charlton Heston. Yellow fangs of his all be flying through other dimensions. Yeah.
So you hear that the compression was rather aggressive when only playing by itself, but we mixed it right here at about 34% so that we have more dry signal going through than we do wet signal. Let's listen to this one more time.
Yeah, came up. It's gonna be less than frozen again. God
I'll
rolled a
A-B
beam
this.
of light down new faces. Kick Lucifer in his teeth like he was Charlton Heston.
So it's subtle, but it adds a little bit of weight underneath the vocal without taking away from the punch and clarity of the original. So this is the first way to go about setting up parallel compression in a mix. But the more traditional approach that ultimately gives us more control is to actually send audio out of, in this case, the vocal bus to another auxiliary track. Let's choose bus 6. I'll bring this up to unity. So we are sending the same amount of signal as is in this bus right now. We'll go down here, call this para comp vox. And what we'll do is I can actually drag this compressor over here. Now we have the bus right here, the vocal bus with 2 tracks right here being sent to bus 6. And we have this bus over here. The input is bus 6. And this is going to be our parallel compression auxiliary track. So if we open up the compressor, what we want here is 100% wet. We don't want any dry signal in the parallel effects return in this case. Again, right here, we have 100% dry now in this channel, and we want 100% wet in this channel. So if I was to turn this compressor off and play back this vocal, we should see that we have equal loudness in each of these buses.
Yeah, came up. It's gonna be
That's
less
exactly
than
what we see here.
frozen again.
And then we have independent fader control over this track relative to the dry. So now if we bring in this compressor and play it back once again.
Yeah, came up. It's gonna be less than frozen again.
In this case, we would have the same result as if we had pushed this compressor on this bus right here at 50%. So we have equal amounts dry and equal amounts wet. But now we have equal amounts dry on this channel and equal amounts wet on this channel. And what we can do with this vocal is bring down the compressed version, the parallel compressed version, and then bring it up in the mix.
Yeah, came up. It's gonna be less than frozen again. God rolled a beam of light down new faces. Kick Lucifer in his teeth.
So if the doubled vocal production technique wasn't enough to fill out this vocal, this parallel compression, although subtle, can really help add a bit of weight to the vocal. Now we can also do the same thing here on the drum bus. If we find the drums right here, we can solo these and listen. And we see here that I'm sending this already to bus 23, which is our drum room, which is effectively a reverb effects return to give a little bit more ambience to the drums. And I'm also sending it here already to bus 24, which is our parallel bus that was here before we started this video. So if I go over to find the parallel bus, it's right here. And so we see on this bus, we have compression, which is acting rather aggressively. And you can really hear it as we bring it into the mix. Really adds a lot of weight and grit to those drums. And one thing I want to mention here is when we're really nailing the compression on the parallel bus, it's important to have this needle jump back and forth a lot. For example, in this one, we're reaching how many dB of gain reduction? nearly 20 dB of gain reduction. However, if we were to have a compressor where it was going down to negative 20 dB and then coming back up to negative 10 before the next hit was happening, the compression effect wouldn't sound as intense. It would sound more like 10 dB of gain reduction with a volume fader turned down about 10 dB. In this case, we're getting the full 20 dB of gain reduction. So I just wanted to make that point that when we're really going for an overcompressed sound, to make sure that this meter, or however you're monitoring, is really going back and forth quite aggressively. And finally, you can see here that even though this was originally set up as a parallel compression bus, I also added in some saturation and some limiting to this channel. And what I want to harp on here is that we can add other processes to this effects return channel or auxiliary track to help shape the compression, which is not possible if we just insert a compressor on the insert of a individual track and then only rely on the mix or wet-dry control to control the amount of compression. So with this parallel compression bus right here, we have independent fader control. We have the other inserts that we can include. I could even throw in an EQ if I wanted and only affect the low end of the drums with the parallel compression. There's a whole bunch of other things that we can do by just having this clean, independent parallel channel or auxiliary track in our mixes. So that is parallel compression inside Logic Pro. Let's hop out and continue the video. All right, so that is parallel compression. If you found this video informative, I would invite you to hit that like button and to also check out my free resource in the description box down below called the My New Microphone Mixing Cheat Sheet. Of course, there are no cheat codes when it comes to mixing, but this so-called cheat sheet is a great reference guide to help you make the right mixing choices at the right times in your mixes. So if you're new to mixing or an intermediate, I would advise checking that out if you are so interested. If you want to hang out more with me here on YouTube, I also invite you to subscribe to the My New Microphone YouTube channel and to also check out these other videos here on the end screen that I will put up. I think you will find them invaluable as well. So go ahead and check all that stuff out, and I'll see you in the next video.